Good morning, everyone. Right, we'll just leave it a minute or two to let everybody come in. We've got a relatively small group today, which is pretty cool. We can make it a bit more interactive, and we're going to get into some live analysis and trying to build up what we did last week. Okay, we'll just wait a minute or two.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, so before we get going, actually, could you just let me know in the chat if you have sent in a video for analysis? Because we've got two groups, you see. We've got a group tomorrow, so I don't want to go through somebody's video who isn't on the call. So if you have, let us know in the chat and we'll go through your video and put you in the hot seat. Okay, Cristiano. Let's have a look. Let me make sure that I have got yours. Yes, we have. Lap 30. Perfect. All right, Cristiano, we'll start with yours. Okay, you sent it Wednesday. That's great. Okay, brilliant, guys. So what we're doing today is we're going to build upon what we spoke about last week, learning to self-analyze your video, your data, and using that to formulate a plan so that you can find some time on the track. It's a tricky thing sometimes because a lot of you guys are actually at a very, very high level, and so it's quite hard to see it sometimes. So we'll see what Cristiano's lap looks like, and maybe we'll speak with him and yeah, and go from there. We're not going to go over too many slides or any slides at all today. Actually, I just want to get straight into the analysis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link. Sorry, where's Cristiano's link? Here we go. In the chat and get going. Okay, perfect. So Laguna Seca. Actually, Cristiano, do you wanna come on and unmute yourself and we'll have a quick chat, if you don't mind.
Sorry?
There you go. How you doing?
I'm fine. And you?
I'm very good, thank you. So thank you for being brave and sending in your lap. Could you just tell us what car and what track, what combination it is?
Yes, it's a Lotus 79 because I participate that in iRacing community, and Laguna Seca, the track.
Seca. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And before we watch the lap, would you say that this is a representative lap? It was a clean lap. It was a good representation of where you currently are with your driving.
Yes. I did, I guess, 30 laps, and this was my best lap. And in a run of 10 laps, almost in the same pace.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Typically what I would do, and I think we've only got one lap here, but typically what I would do is when I'm analyzing, I would look at 4 or 5 laps, in a group together, so you get a really good understanding of where the driver's at. But one lap is fine. We'll just watch it a couple of times. And remember, this first time that we watch it, we're going to watch it in full speed before we then break it down into a bit more detail. So remember, everybody, what we're doing. And even if you don't drive the 79 and you don't drive Laguna Seca, this is going to be beneficial for you because you'll see how we actually formulate some kind of plan and how we think about how the car is reacting. So I'll open up the answers to everything that I say a little bit more than I normally would, so that everyone can apply it to their own driving. So let me just drop the link in the chat. You can either watch it on YouTube or I will play it.
Mute.
I will play it through Zoom as well, but just know that the frame rate won't be particularly good. So There's the link in the chat now, and I'm just going to share my screen, which you should all see now. And we'll watch it. So remember, we're looking for positioning. We're looking for fluidity in the car. We're looking to see if Cristiano's trying too hard or not at the limit, if there's any big imbalance problems with the car. Let me just get my extra windows up. Okay, so let's play it. Okay, so I'm just going to play it back again because it's so quick. There's nothing glaring, no glaring mistakes there. So let's watch it back again. Okay, so that was a good lap, and this is a great example of actually when you watch it in full speed, it's very difficult to see any issues in there. The racing line looks good. The car looks fluid. There doesn't seem to be any huge balance issues in the car. So all of the fundamental stuff is covered, and so we're going to have to go through in much more detail to try and understand if there's any time that we can find. So this is why I like to download the file and go through it. I use QuickTime, but whatever kind of video, so that you can scroll through it as I am here. So you don't feel under pressure and you can look at the details in the driving. So the main thing that I'm looking at as we're coming down to turn one is just looking at the pedal work initially to see if there's any issues there. Because typically, if there's a time to be found, it will be because of the brake pressure and the trail braking, and then how the driver gets back on the throttle. If all of the other stuff is okay, if the racing line is looking good, if the car looks fluid, there's no glaring mistakes here from Cristiano. Just quickly, Cristiano, how much off the pace or are you? Do you know how far, what a great pace would be around here?
Yeah, I'm about 1.5 seconds down from the best lap in this
Okay,
in this
so
circuit.
1.5 over 75 seconds. It's a couple of percent, I would say. Okay, and that's off the very, very best, right?
Yeah, I'm look average guys there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look. So we're looking to see in the first big braking area, especially here at Laguna Seca, whether the car's platform is flat. It is pretty much got a little bit of steering angle in there, so there might be a little bit, but the brake pressure is solid. Bleeding off, coming down the gears. So we're watching the brake trace here to try and understand what it's doing. Now we're watching the steering. It's all looking good. Tiny little bit of brake pressure here. That's great. Just keeping the nose in. Now he's off the brakes. We've got the car here. Line looks good. The car's turning well. Cristiano's getting back on the throttle in about the right place. See, he's got on it a bit and the car wouldn't accept it. And then he's getting back on the throttle, opening up the car on the exit. So, I mean, it all looks good. Cristiano, from your perspective, what would you say is limiting you from going faster? Is there an imbalance in the car? Are you waiting for the front to grip up? Are you limited by the rear of the car? Can you give me... So Cristiano's, you know, a high level of driver. So you have to think through like when you're self-analyzing, you have to think through this process. What's stopping me from going faster? Compare that with the video footage. And so today I'm going to be asking Cristiano the questions to try and extract where we can try and make this car a bit faster.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Scott. Sometimes I felt some oversteering the entry in some corners, but when I not lift the pedal in the gas, only put brakes a little bit brakes in the entry, and I felt some oversteer in the turns 2, 3, for example, in this track.
Okay, yeah, in the kind of medium speed corners.
Yeah.
On the entry. Okay. And are you running this car in, is it open setup or fixed?
Yes, it's open both setup.
Okay. So you could potentially change that. So we could talk about that as well, which will be quite interesting. So okay, let's talk about, remember last week I spoke about patterns and trying to find the limitations, find the problems across a number of different corner types. So slow, medium, or fast, or phases of a corner. So entry, apex, and exit. So Cristiano, you said there before that you were struggling in 2, 3, and 4. Is that right?
Yes, in the next corner, the number 2,
Yeah.
number 3, and there are a fast corner going uphill.
Yeah.
This one is very tricky because sometimes you lost the position.
Because of the rear of the car again.
I guess this is understeer because I lost the front sometimes. Okay,
so we're saying, just to run through things, you're struggling in 2, which is the next right-hander. Is that right? Is that
yes?
That's 2. So 2, 3, and 4, which are all kind of medium speed, 3rd or 4th gear, which would then make me think, well, actually, it's it could be an aero thing. This, hang on, let me just have a quick look. Lotus 79. Yeah, so it could be an aero thing in terms of, okay, when we're going into those medium speed corners, we're struggling with the rear of the car. But then you said going into the quicker corners, you're struggling with the front. So that doesn't necessarily make sense. But what I'm explaining here, guys, is that you have to try and start to define where the problem is. So then you can isolate or have a bit more detail in that problem. So then you could begin to work on your technique or setup. And so there's a number of different things. It's like either the speed of the corner, which can then be either mechanical grip for the slower corners or aero grip for the medium and faster corners, or the phases of the corner, which potentially could be like a roll bar or springing or something like that. So Cristiano, I'm going to whiz forward a little bit actually, because it's
that
a great
corner.
conversation to have. Yeah. So you're saying here it has some understeer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess you might get that anyway because you're coming over a crest and you've got a gradient change. But out of interest, what is it like through these final? Well, this left-hander and then the next right. What's the balance of the car like there? Can you think that through?
Yeah. The balance, I think it's okay, but I have to control in the gas because it's oversteering. If I push the gas full, I felt vibration in my gas, and it looks like oversteer.
Okay. So therefore, if I just whiz this back, sorry for whizzing back and forward, everyone, but Cristiano's saying he has some oversteer here, and this is a great lap from Cristiano, right? So sometimes it can be difficult to see the oversteer in the car because Cristiano is adjusting himself to that oversteer. It's not that apparent, or it's not apparent at all sometimes from just looking at the video because the driver is controlling it. So this is why we've had to go a level deeper and try and pull this information from Cristiano. And the question is, which end of the car is stopping you from going faster? And in this case, Cristiano is saying it's the rear of the car, and it's in the medium high-speed corners, apart from that one left corner which goes up the hill. Am I correct with that, Cristiano?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so we're saying here we're struggling. And are you struggling on entry, apex, and exit, or just various parts of those?
No, only at the entry.
Only at the entry. Okay. And is that okay? So you said it was at the entry here, and apex to exit is okay. What about here?
Here is the same. When I push the brake a little bit more,
yeah,
I get oversteer entry.
Oversteer. Okay. And the reason that I'm asking Cristiano these questions is to understand whether it's a universal problem through the corner. So that means that it's from entry all the way through the corner. So you've got oversteer, entry, apex, and exit. Or whether it's a phase type problem as to whether it's one of those phases. So entry, apex, or exit, right? And then from there, you can begin to understand what kind of setup change you might want to make. There are many different setup changes that you can make, and it's a holistic thing, as in one thing might affect something else. So you really do need to know quite a lot about that. However, let me explain simply. A universal change in a car would be something like the rake. So raising up the rear ride height. That will affect the car in low and high speed corners and every phase of those corners. So entry, apex, and exit, because you've basically got the rear of the car higher, which puts more load over the front tires, which means they will have more grip and the rear will have less, and it will do that everywhere. That's a universal change. On the other side of things, you've got a more precise detailed change, which will affect the car in just a phase of a corner. So for example, if you change the front springs, well, no, let me say something else. If you change the front dampers, the bump or the compression on the front dampers, it would make most of the change on the corner entry, because you get on the brakes. If you increase the compression on the front dampers, the front suspension will compress less when you get on the brakes and when you trail brake into the corner, therefore leaving more weight over the rear of the car, therefore giving it more grip. However, once you come off those brakes, it's almost irrelevant, the front damping, because then the weight moves to the rear of the car and it's controlled by the rear suspension. Mostly, you know, of course, it's not black and white like this, but mostly it will do that. And so that's why I'm trying to identify where we've got these problems. So these first two problem corners, we've got oversteer on the entry of a medium speed corner. And this is why going through the track map, as I describe in the program, is really important. If Cristiano got a track map out and cut each corner up into 3 sections, entry, apex, and exit, he'd be able to figure this out himself. He'd be able to say, okay, turns 2, 3, I've got oversteer on entry, a 3 out of 5. At the apex, it's neutral. And on the exit, I've got 1 out of 5 oversteer. And when you do that, you can then start to group all these corners together by speed and then look at the phases of the corner. And you can then really get a good view of where you should prioritize your technique or your setup change. Does that make sense? So I want to whiz forward a little bit. So you've got, how about here, Cristiano?
About here is neutral.
Yeah. Still neutral at the apex?
Yes.
Yeah, so the car's okay here. It's a bit of a slow corner. Here you mentioned it gets understeer. Although I have to say, if you look at the steering wheel, you turn it in and then you pause. See that pause in the steering wheel? Actually, you come out a little bit and then go back in again and then you come out again. That to me looks like a little bit of oversteer on the entry, I have to say. So let me just break that down. If you can all see that, I'll move this out of the way. Watch his hands on the steering wheel. Loads it up beautifully on the way in, really gently there. Then as the car's weight moves to the outside, that's all loaded up well. Then he begins to pause on the steering wheel and even just start to come out a little bit while the rear settles down. There, you can see it as he comes over the bump. And then he puts the steering angle back in. This is why it's also very useful to confirm everything with the steering. So I would say there, Cristiano, actually on this lap in particular, and I don't know what it's like on the other laps, you're probably getting a little bit of oversteer on the way in. We'll ignore these slow corners for the moment. And then here, again, I can see you pausing at this moment. Watch your hands again. So you're turning it in, pausing, and then pausing, coming back out, and then going, and then it's rotating all the way through that section there, because you can see these small. You can see you load the car in, and then you can see the small corrections all the way through. Let's have a look at this last one. Loads it up, introduces it, loads it up. You can see him cranking it on, and there, I would say that was neutral, right? If you compare this corner to the previous one, he gradually just increases the steering angle, as you should, and then it comes back out again. There's no micro corrections there. So I'm saying that Cristiano has got entry oversteer in the medium and high speed corners. So I think, and then what we need to do is actually look what's going on in the low speed corners to see, because at the moment we know it's got entry oversteer, right? And potentially a little bit further through the corner, but we don't know what the car's doing in the slower corners. So if it's oversteering in the slower corners as well, it could be that we just need to make a universal change and lower the rear ride height, and that could benefit the car everywhere. However, if the car's okay in the slower corners, then it isn't a universal change that we need to make. It's a more precise change or an aero change, and then we can think about that. So you can see how you start to build up this picture of where and how you should change the setup. So let's have a look through one. So watch the steering. All looks good. Winds the lock on. waiting for the front to come in. If anything, it looks like a little bit of understeer there, if I'm guessing. I don't know what you're feeling there, Cristiano. Just at this point here, it's like you're waiting for the front to turn. Am I right in my assessment, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, I think you are right, but a little oversteer maybe. Looks like neutral.
Yeah, it looks neutral, and this is just for everybody.
I don't have this feeling.
You don't
so sensitive.
Yeah, exactly. So what I think the next step for you, Cristiano, is like being so sensitive, precisely sensitive all around the circuit. That's where you need to work on yourself, the next level for you. And that's a very high level to have the ability to do that. Because then you can just slightly adapt your own technique, but also more importantly, get into the setup as well. Cristiano's lap is so precise and his technique is adapting, as you can see, that it is quite difficult from my perspective to pull anything out because it's also refined. With a driver that might be a little bit more off the pace, it's a lot easier to see because the mistake is bigger. I would say there's a little bit of push there at the mid corner. We'll go through these because we've seen them. Let's get up to the corkscrew. Now, it is quite difficult at Laguna Seca because there's so much gradient change and elevation that kind of messes with the physics or the car's dynamics a little bit. So it might be worthwhile, Cristiano, you taking this car on a flatter circuit and seeing what the balance is like there, where you've got less variables in terms of the gradient change. But let's look what it's like here. So he's loading it up, bringing the steering in, and it's one smooth lock in. Little correction there, but there is a big gradient change, as I mentioned, so it always goes a bit light there. But other than that, it looks perfect. There isn't much going on, actually, so quite difficult to pull any information. But what we're definitely not seeing is oversteer like we saw in the other corners, right? So let's have a look here. This is probably one of the best slow corners to look at because it's not got much gradient change. It loads the steering up, introduces it, loads it up. No pause on the steering wheel. Little bit of rotation on the exit as he gets on the throttle, so it's perfect. So my summary is that in the slower corners, the car looks pretty good. Looks pretty balanced. Maybe a hint of understeer, but that's okay. But in the medium and high-speed corners, there's entry oversteer. So, I mean, I think the first thing that I would do, Cristiano, is put a little bit of rear wing on the car. I would try that just to see if it settled the rear down on the entry to those corners. The danger then is that if it cures the entry oversteer in those medium high-speed corners, then it might actually push the car into understeer at mid to exit because you've still got more grip on the rear and the car seemed pretty well balanced mid to exit. So I do a session where I try a tiny little bit more wing on the rear, or alternatively take some off the front. You're just trying to shift the aero balance. And if that doesn't work, go back, or if that doesn't make you faster, go back to the wing that you're running right now, and then change something that will affect the car just on the corner entry. So I would say something like, has this got adjustable dampers on it? I've not driven this car, so I don't know.
Yes, there are.
Yeah, are they? Do you have bump and rebound, low speed and high speed? How many directions are they?
Yeah, there are the rebounds too.
Okay.
In the front and the rear.
Okay, you've got bump and rebound. So that's a two-way damper. So when you have bump and rebound. So I would then try increasing the front bump. So you're stiffening the front bump so that when you do get on the brakes in those medium speed corners, it drops down a little bit less on the front, and that might help. However, it might amplify the understeer in some of the slower corners, right? Because it's still doing the same job in the slower corners. So you can probably see that with setup, as I said before, it's an holistic thing that one thing will affect another. And sometimes there is not a perfect answer. It's about finding the best thing to do there. So try the wing. If that doesn't work, move it back. Try some front bump. Yeah, and then go from there, really. But I think hopefully we've identified where the issues are. Do you think of it in that way, Cristiano? Have you ever kind of grouped the issues in that way and the patterns? Do you have a process for this, or are you just trying random things?
Yeah, just trying random things. I'm learning now this technique to be precise and go straight to the point where to fix in the setup.
Yes,
I'm learning.
You're learning. You're learning.
Yeah.
So the next thing for you to develop as a driver, and this is for a lot of drivers that are kind of at the level or just below the level where you are, is get that track map, because it's work. You're obviously dedicated drivers because you're doing this program. It's work to sit there and actually like revise or study, but that's what you need to do to get the next bit of time. So break the corners up into 3 sections, identify, and whether that's from your memory or from a combination of your memory and the video. So remember, we're looking very specifically at what the steering wheel's doing. And just to let me just stop sharing the screen so you can, where's it gone? There we go. So when you're looking at the, bloody hell, come on. So when you're looking at the steering wheel, when the car's oversteering, you'll see the driver turn it in, and then they'll pause, or actually even give it a little bit of counter steering. They'll let the rear settle down, and then they'll go back in again, right? That's how you can see if the car's rotating or going into oversteer. Of course, you have some drivers who turn it in and then they're, properly oversteering. That will definitely be costing them time. So that's rear limited. When you're front limited, you'll see the driver go in, and then they'll crank on the steering angle, and then it will kind of go over the top of a cam like this, like it's loaded up, and then all of a sudden it begins to get lighter. So you'll see the driver go in and then get light like this. That's understeer. And then when the car's just perfectly positioned, you'll see them go in and just gradually add on the steering angle, as we saw a couple of times there with Cristiano. And that's where you can see that even when you're driving very refined like Cristiano, that's when you can see that happening. Okay, so that's what you should be looking out for. And Cristiano, break the corners down, right? And then what you want to do is look at, once you've got your whole track map there, look at all of the corner entries, right? And if you can see oversteer 3 on all of the corner entries, there's a problem with the corner entry. And yes, you can try and change it with your technique, or you can begin to play with the setup. If you've got it at the mid corner, you know what to do there. If you've got it on the corner exit, you know what to do there, and you can see a pattern. Beyond that, especially when you're in aero cars, you need to split the corners up by speed as well. So group all of the fast corners together, all of the slow corners together, and see if there's oversteer on one and it's neutral in the slow. If there's oversteer on the fast corners and it's neutral or pretty good in the slow corners, that there's just an aero imbalance in the car. And they're the kind of 2 ways that you should be going about it. The next challenge, of course, is if I have oversteer, or if I have a problem in a particular part of the corner, where do I go with the setup? And so I would say there's a number of things. Mechanically, if you're in a mechanical car like the Mazda or something like that, and you've got oversteer everywhere or understeer everywhere, just change the ride height of the car, right? We're just going to be moving the weight to the front or the rear. And this is something that you can do. We actually started to make a course. We haven't finished it yet, but this is something that we started to plan out. Is like, get in a Mazda or a mechanically gripped car and just raise the rear ride height up, and you'll see how oversteery it is. And then go the other extreme, put the rear ride height back down and raise the front ride height up, and you'll see that it's got loads of understeer. And then you can gradually find this perfect pitch where the car is well balanced. But it's about going through the journey and discovering what each thing does. So universal changes, you can change the ride height. Aero changes, of course, it's more front and rear wing that you want to find the balance with. But then for the phases of the corner problems or setup issues, it's about thinking what part of the suspension is affecting the car. So front springs will affect when you get on the brakes initially. The car's flat like this, poof, you get on the brakes. It will affect the roll of the car side to side and the kind of distribution. And then when you get on the throttle, actually it doesn't do as much because the weight goes to the rear, right? So you need to think about dynamically. Same with the front dampers. You've got the compression, which will change the car when you initially get on the brakes and when you turn. And then you've got the rebound, right? So imagine you've got a scenario where you are at the apex, you then get on the throttle and the car understeers. Now, you can sort some of this out at the rear end of the car, but some of it, if it's very fine, can be at the front in the rebound of the car. So it's, imagine the front spring compressing, and then the rebound is when it comes back up, and the damper inside the spring or the rocker, wherever it is restricting how quickly that spring comes back up. So if you've got understeer after you get on the throttle, increasing the resistance of this rebound will mean that the springs come up more slowly, will mean that more weight stays over the front end for longer, which means that it retains its grip as you come out of the corner. Okay, so you need to think about all of these things together, which can be quite challenging because there's so many different things to do. But start off with the simple things: the wings, the rake, and for me, quite an easy thing to do is the bump in the dampers. So, for example, imagine you've got the same understeer, or no, let's say oversteer. You've got some oversteer on the exit of the corner when you get on the throttle. If you increased the rear bump on the rear dampers, you would slow down how quickly the rear of the car squats. And sorry, I can't remember where I went with this. If you've got oversteer, let me start again. If you've got oversteer on the exit when you get on the throttle, you want to get the weight over the rear of the car more quickly. So you would soften the rear bump, right? So that the car squats down more quickly. It's got more weight over the rear of the car. And there's many things that you can do with that, but I would start with those 3 or 4 things just so you can start to work on that. We've got a question from Tenet in the chat. So guys, look, I wanted to go over that. This seminar has actually gone in a slightly different direction than I would have expected it to, because Cristiano's lap was a great one, and there wasn't much in the technique there. It's more about how he then develops and the strategies that he needs. So I hope it's been useful from that perspective, and jotting down what you're doing on the track and breaking each corner up is very, very powerful. Tenet, you've got a question here. Do you want to unmute yourself and we can talk it through, because it's quite long. Are you there? Oh, he's got no mic. Okay, so Tenet says, "Hi Scott, back to some basics for me. Could you please explain when you throw a car into a corner, e.g. Lime Rock Park last turn? Turns my instructor talked about this versus being smooth. I was too smooth. Not sure if you can answer this, but it is just hard to understand quick corners to be smooth and which to be more aggressive. I am no Cristiano. Actually, last 2 turns at Lime Rock." Okay. I mean, to be honest, Tenet, it really depends on the car. All we're trying to do, if you're in a single seater, which is stiff and light, you can be more aggressive, and it's on slick tires, right? So it's about managing that load moving across the car. So I don't know what car you're in. Maybe you can let me know in the chat. But if you're in something softer, like, you know, the Skip Barber car, for example, which has got treaded tires, so the tread in the tires moving around, it's got big sidewall, you're going to have to be a bit more gentle. But there's always this sweet spot. There's always this sweet spot where some drivers are being too aggressive and other drivers just aren't putting enough load through the car. So I can see in the chat now, you said you're in the MX-5. So, I mean, if you're being too soft or too gentle in the MX-5, you are being a very, very gentle, which is actually a better kind of side to begin on than being too aggressive. But it's that transition that's very important. So I would say to you, the advice that I have is, first of all, make sure that your vision's in the right area, looking up the road, as I speak about a lot in the programs and online, because from that you then define the racing line, and you can visualize your line through the corner. But then experiment. Just experiment. It's a constant test. It's a constant feedback loop when we're on the track. So what I would say to you is pick a couple of corners on your favorite circuit and space them apart from each other. So you've got some space in between where you can actually just ease up and have a think about your driving, and gradually over 5 or 10 laps, just become more aggressive with how you steer the car into the corner. And at some point, you will feel the car turn into the corner with more G-force. And then at some later point where you're becoming too aggressive, you'll make it understeer, or the car will slide and it will throw you off the track. And so what you're looking for is to go from being too smooth to actually going through being perfect and too aggressive, so you know what that feels like, and then you can rein it back in and kind of get more refined around this perfect steering rate. But we just want to gradually speed up the steering rate as you go in there, and that should help you. So I hope that's been useful.
Scott, can you hear me there?
Yes, I can, mate. Yeah.
I just want to grab a mic. Thanks for that. No, what he said was basically, for most of my lap, he's like, yeah, turn in is absolutely perfect. Or not. He said my steering was nice and smooth, but then just for those last 2 corners, he's like, no, just be a lot more aggressive, throw it into those turns versus being smoother. And
right, okay.
Just at my level, like, I'm, as I said, no Cristiano, my consistency is nowhere there. I've still got a lot to learn and a lot to practice, and just don't have the time generally.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was just a question that's like, oh, yeah, I'll just ask this one. You can, you might be able to answer it, might not be able to answer it, but as I said, it just comes down to practice, I think, and familiarising.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the yeah, I mean, the last corner line looks like super fast, isn't it? You know, in a faster corner.
And even the second last one, you can go flat through that one as well.
Right. Okay. I mean, with the MX-5, compared to a single seater, for example, you have to be quite smooth. Like, it's all relative, isn't it? So it's quite difficult for me to know without seeing your driving. But like I say, just run through that, and if it's only on these 2 corners, just get a bit more aggressive until you go too aggressive, and then you'll feel it, and then you know to bring it back. It's about extracting the most grip from the car and forcing it to pull the most lateral G that it can. And of course, if we just go super aggressive and you turn it in like this, it's just going to break traction, because you're not allowing the weight of the car to get out there and load up the outside tires. On the other side of things, if you're being way too careful, then you're not loading them up enough, and also it affects the racing line, because you take so long to turn it in that you kind of have to turn in very early, or you end up missing the apex.
Yep. No, exactly. Spot on. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, guys. Well, look, let's go for another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not going to go over another lap because we won't get through it in the proper detail that I would like to. So if you've got any breakthroughs that you've had in the last couple of weeks that you want to talk about, if you've got any questions as well, please let me know and we'll talk about them. So just unmute yourself and say hello. Okay, well,
Scott, I'll fire
okay.
another question.
Yeah, go on.
Another basic one. With braking, now in the initial phase of braking, do you want to only very lightly touch the brakes so that you move the weight forward, then obviously increasing to your maximum that you're going to apply? So I guess the initial bit of braking is in 2 phases, whereas if you go immediately to that highest point you're going to brake at, the car hasn't had enough time to actually move forward, get the weight over the front wheels, and therefore you're not going to get actually maximum braking potential.
Yes, that's exactly right. So what you're saying, just to reiterate it again to everybody, is that if you smash the brakes very, very quickly, the front tires don't have the grip because they haven't got all of the weight over them yet, and you need to kind of follow that weight transfer across. But what I will say, Ten, is that typically the problem isn't a driver getting on the brakes too quickly, it's them getting on the brakes too slowly and kind of ramping up like you would do when you're driving on the road. So again, it's finding that sweet spot, but 95% of the problems in this area is that drivers don't get on the brakes quickly enough, not that they're getting on them too quickly. So I would work on that probably first, especially in something like the Mazda. You can get on them pretty hard, pretty quick.
I just know, having done a few track days, it is very difficult going from, as you said, road driving to track driving where you don't trail brake when you're going to the shops, and getting on the brakes hard it's a completely opposite thing to what you do on your daily driving.
Yeah, well, both ends of the braking are the opposite, right? You don't smash the brake straight away, and then also you don't trail. So it's almost like you need the roles to reverse, which is why I think braking on track is so difficult. And why we see that it's normally the brakes. If you take a road driver, they'll ramp up the brake pressure initially and then just jump off them, which is the opposite of what we need to do, unfortunately.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys. Well, if no more questions, I'm going to wrap things up there. Thank you so much for joining me today, and also on the program as a whole. I hope you've all taken some good steps forward, and thank you for trusting Driver 61 with your training. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you do have your training sessions today, please enjoy them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye together.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Have a great one. Bye bye.
Thanks,
Thank
too.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.